Melissa and Deb are joining us today as our Auslan interpreters, so thank you very much, Melissa and Deb. My name is Becc Spradau and I'm the Senior Programs Manager at VolunteeringACT. During this session, I've skipped ahead in my notes. I'm delighted to be facilitating the panel discussion, Harnessing the Power of Lived Experience. I'm really passionate about this topic, both as a service user and a service provider. I'm delighted to welcome to the space some wonderful and like-minded people. During this session, each of our panel members will be sharing about their own lived experience. And once each of them has shared, we will open up the floor to questions. So think about that on your way through. If you think that's a really good question I'd like to ask it, please write it down. When we are getting to the question stage, our wonderful room lead, Kristen, who you might have seen on the way through, will bring a microphone around for you. If anyone has any accessibility needs that haven't been met yet, please do go and see Kristen and she will help you. Or if you would like her to come and see you, please raise your hand now. Excellent. So let's get started. Our first panellist is Fiona Woods. Fiona became the President of Blind Citizens Australia in December 2021 and has been one of its directors since 2017. All directors are volunteers who are blind or vision impaired. Fiona has been totally blind since early childhood. She studied law and arts, but her recent career has been as the stay-at-home parent of her 6 children. She has also recently been elected a volunteer of Vision 2020 Australia. Welcome, Fiona.
Thanks, Becc, and good morning, everyone. We didn't quite think through the microphones with the Braille reading, so thanks to Beth for holding it for me. Good morning, everyone. I'm very excited to be here. As Becc said, I'm the President of Blind Citizens Australia. It is a voluntary position. We do have staff as well, but most of our directors are also all the directors are volunteers. Blind Citizens Australia, which I will refer to as BCA, our purpose is to inform, connect and empower people who are blind or vision impaired and the wider community. So we organise events and programs around the needs and interests of people who are blind or vision impaired, such as education, employment, travel, music, assistive technology, audio description, lots of things, whatever members want really. We also develop public policies to explain the access needs that we have for the community, such as pedestrian safety, health and education. At BCA, people showed me really important things like how to fold nappies and how to use VoiceOver on my iPhone. But I also learned the power of the collective voice. I myself can complain when I go to vote that I have to whisper into someone's ear at the electoral polling booth and it's not very private. But as an organisation, we can lobby for change to the electoral system so that now we can actually ring up and use a phone to vote privately. And one day we might even achieve a secret ballot by the use of technology. You can probably tell why I volunteer for BCA, because I believe in it really passionately. And I'm sure most of you, or all of you, probably believe passionately in your own organisations. People with disability want to volunteer. It's a way of contributing to our communities. It's a way to build skills and networks. The workforce participation rate for people with disability is around 55%. For the general community, it's around 84%. So it's very hard to get jobs. People see volunteering as a possible pathway to employment, and it has been for some people. And if you're not looking for employment, or if it doesn't lead to employment, or you've already retired, it's a productive way to use time, build capacity, and socialise. The topic is today lived experience, so I'll tell you a little bit about mine. I guess I was brought up by volunteers, so it's sort of in my blood. You know, if all your family's always been volunteering, you probably all know that that means you see the value of it. When I moved interstate and had my first child, the volunteer counsellors at the Australian Breastfeeding Association gave me information, support and acceptance. I was really excited to train as a volunteer breastfeeding counsellor. It gave me a real role in my local community, beyond being a blind person, and it meant that I developed lots of new skills while I was a stay-at-home parent. Coincidentally, I was able to exemplify that parents with disability exist, can cope and can lead. In counselling on the phone and running my local group, blindness was really irrelevant and made no difference to the way I did my job. Once my children grew up, I realised that more the needs of my own other communities, so I joined the BCA board. Lots of people with disability volunteer for their disability organisations and sporting organisations, but obviously not enough of them seek representation from their consumer user groups. So service users need to be involved in those as well. And for today, I asked some of my Facebook friends what their experiences were of volunteering. Some of them said they wanted to be big sisters or big brothers, Samaritans or foster carers. They wanted to work for animal shelters, in land care and in conservation. And they expected to be accepted if they wanted to do office jobs or counselling, but even those jobs can be out of reach if your phone system is inaccessible or your computer system hasn't been designed using universal inclusion principles. But people expected to be rejected for those kind of volunteering opportunities that went beyond that because they didn't put themselves forward for them because no one wants rejection. Some of you might be thinking, well, blind people don't want to work for us. You know, we've never seen a blind or vision impaired person come in. But 80% of vision impairment relates to ageing. And by 2050, 1 in 4 of you, not me, will need treatment relating to vision. So if you have older volunteers, you'll be having people who are losing vision. And if you have younger volunteers, they may not feel comfortable declaring that they have a vision loss. Unless you're totally blind like me and a very small minority who don't have a choice, there's a lot of issues to weigh up before you reveal that you might need modifications to do your job. It's often thought that blind or vision impaired people won't be able to do the job, they'll need extra help or special modifications or they'll pose some sort of risk. But in fact, we can be safe, loyal and reliable workers. Our lived experience has often taught us how to plan and strategise and give us advanced skills in problem solving and people management. I've been organising teams of specialist teachers and readers and drivers ever since high school, which certainly helped when it came to running my family. I guarantee you that the communities you work with also include people who are blind or vision impaired, and including us as volunteers can increase your organisation's credibility, the degree to which you can empathise with people, and certainly means you reflect your community. People who are blind or vision impaired are as diverse as Australia, so we're also LGBTIQA+, Aboriginal, older. All of us have the regular range of unique and intersecting characteristics, so each person's experience of vision impairment will also be different, and each person's vision might actually change quite often. So organisations can take advantage of this pool of volunteers by being flexible and having a positive attitude. You don't have to be 100% accessible to be inclusive and welcoming. Maybe think about some of the things that might be discouraging people who are blind or vision impaired from offering to work for you. Things like stipulating that you need a driver's licence. Is it really necessary? Are there other ways people could get around? Maybe they don't even need to travel in today's world. Do your volunteers have to fill out a particular form in a particular way? Could you offer an alternative, such as ringing for assistance or emailing details? Promotional material, if it includes images and graphics, make sure it includes text description so people know what you're on about. If you're using font, needs to be reasonably sized and good contrast, and that will help everybody. And if you have premises, ensure they're well lit, have clear travel paths, and they're free of trip hazards. Probably most importantly, include questions around people's access needs, just as Becc did at the start of the session. This won't make you a perfectly accessible organisation, but the people who believe in your cause will know that you have limited resources, but it will indicate that you welcome a diverse workforce. You can find some helpful resources on BCA's website, which is bca.org, Blind Citizens Australia, under employment. And I really look forward to learning from my fellow panellists and the rest of the stream today, because my volunteers are also diverse. And I'd like to thank Volunteering Australia for this opportunity.
Thank you, Fiona. I would now like to introduce you to Beth Garwood. Beth is a huge advocate for safely harnessing the power of lived experience. After a number of years policing in the Northern Territory, Beth burned out in 2018 and was diagnosed with PTSD and bipolar disorder. They joined Mental Health Illness Education ACT, or MEACT as we call it locally, in 2021 to share their story with the aim of reducing stigma associated with mental illness, to empower others to better manage their own mental health and send a powerful message of hope. Learning to manage their experience of bipolar has enabled Beth to live an authentic and far happier, healthier and more fulfilling life than they could have ever dreamed possible. And for this, they are incredibly grateful. Please welcome Beth.
Thank you, Becc, and good morning, everyone. I feel so incredibly lucky and grateful to have an opportunity to be here speaking with you today on a topic that I am so deeply passionate about. and that's harnessing the power of lived experience to not only build a better future for volunteering, but for our society in general. So this lived experience, what is it that we're talking about? Byrne and Wykes, 2020, define lived experience as mental health challenges that have caused life as we knew it to change so significantly we have to reimagine and redefine ourselves, our place in the world and our future plans. The lived experience perspective is not about individual illness or specific diagnosis, but rather universal experiences such as marginalisation, loss of power, status, citizenship, employment, a stable home and relationships. It's not just about loss, but also about regaining hope, which is essential in the context of recovery and healing. So simply put, lived experience is an experience of adversity, whether that adversity be mental illness, chronic health issues, disability, domestic violence, war, poverty, natural disasters. Now, what words come to mind when we think of overcoming adversity? For me, I think of inspiration, bravery, courage, what strength, resilience, willpower and determination. But sadly for many people with a lived experience, it comes with a burden of secrecy. There is so much fear, shame and stigma attached to it. Now, stigma describes our tendency to fear and exclude those we perceive as different to ourselves. It is the assumptions that we make about people based on stereotypes associated with the category we or others have put them in. This stigma prevents people from showing up authentically, from experiencing connection and belonging, from contributing, finding meaning and purpose, sharing their unique gifts with the world. At MEACT, we address stigma with the power of sharing our lived experience of mental illness across the Canberra community. Now, it's critical, of course, that we do this in a safe way so as to limit and minimise the potential for emotional distress for everyone involved. Because, of course, our aim is to connect, educate, raise awareness, promote early help seeking and send a powerful message of hope, not simply turn up, trauma dump and leave. So to harness the power of lived experience in a safe way, in 2011, MEACT developed the Do No Harm framework, which has since been evaluated as the best practice approach to communication about lived experience, particularly mental health. And it encompasses 6 principles: context and purpose, recovery emphasis, safe talking, limits to helping, respectful and inclusive language, and self-care. Our Do No Harm framework is trauma-informed, recovery-oriented, fosters inclusion and creates a safe space for authentic engagement. The culture it creates in a work environment empowers people to bring their whole selves to work, whatever that looks like on any given day, knowing that they will be met with empathy, understanding and support. This is the best gift you're ever going to give a person, is permission to feel safe in their own skin, to feel worthy and to feel like they are enough. As a volunteer engagement and development manager at MEACT, I get to watch on with pride as volunteers unshackle themselves from the burden of silence, from shame and stigma. I get to watch as they develop new skills and achieve things that they had come to believe were no longer possible, and to contribute in a meaningful way while utilising their lived expertise, something that they had previously been made to believe was actually a weakness and something to be ashamed of. It is evident that volunteering offers a unique opportunity for an individual who may not have been afforded opportunities to show up, be seen, contribute and grow in other areas of their life. Harnessing the power of lived experience is life-changing and in some cases even life-saving. We really can build a better and sustainable future for volunteering, even if it's just one person, one work unit or one organisation at a time. These things have a ripple effect across the community. So please, consider how you can harness the power of lived experience in your own organisation. Of course, MEACT, we would love the opportunity to support you to do so. At the very least, try and find the courage to show up as your 100% unapologetically authentic self. When you do so, you create space for others to do the same. And finally, in the words of someone much wiser than I, in a world full of algorithms, hashtags and followers, don't forget the true importance of real human connection. Thank you.
Thank you, Beth. Our final panellist today is Felix Perigrie. Felix is a counsellor, peer worker and lifelong volunteer and is currently combining all these things at Lifeline Melbourne as a supervisor to the Crisis Line volunteers. They have a history of being very good with people but very bad with numbers, social cues and boredom. So the biggest surprise about their attention deficit disorder was not getting diagnosed until their 30s. Since the diagnosis, Felix has looked back at their successes and failures, especially in work and volunteering settings, and noted how being neurodiverse played a part and how a little bit of understanding could have made a world of difference. Please welcome Felix.
I noticed something fun while everyone was talking. We have Becc, Beth, and then Fiona and Felix on this side. So I'm enjoying that. I'm going to quickly start by defining neurodiversity because it's a big word for a very simple concept. Neurodiverse, difference in thinking differently. Oh, that was a bit of a repetition. And its sister concept, being neurotypical, thinking typically, the normal way that we assume people's brains work. When we think of neurodiversity, it's usually categorized as people who experience, should have shaken this out before I started. It's described as the various ways people's brains work in different contexts, but is most often used to describe dyslexia, dyscalculia, the various disses that describe people who struggle with things that are considered normally very easy. It also contains Tourette's, it also contains ADHD and the autism spectrum disorder, everything that comes in that space. The thing about it is most of these diagnoses, most of these issues that people experience are described with the deficit in mind, with the issues that people cause others. The best example I can think for this is dyslexia. I recently found out that most dyslexic people think in 3D. So they can take images, concepts, maps, and create an entire 3D map of those things that they can manipulate and walk through and experience all in their heads. If you Google dyslexia, the definition is someone who is, or the condition that causes someone to struggle with reading, writing, spelling. What? These are people who are creating 3D maps in their minds. They are creating incredibly complex worldscapes. But we talk about them as they can't do words that good. And that's the experience for many neurodiverse people. We exist in a context of incredible complexity, but the actual definitions people use to describe us are very, very limited. Then it brings us to everyone here. How does that impact you when you're working with volunteers? The hard part is if you don't have any disabilities, if you don't have any neurodiversity yourself, if you aren't a member of a minority group, let's be honest, this really covers a huge group of people. It's very hard to realize what is different or difficult for others if you're not experiencing it, and if the dominant narrative agrees that these are easy things to do. What are some easy things to do? Reading. Reading is considered a very simple, fundamental thing everyone's capable of. As Fiona mentioned, reading is, you learn it, and the normal font size, what, 11 or 12 Arial, or if we're unlucky, Times New Roman, that's normal. You laugh, but for a while that was how we wrote, and suddenly someone realized, wait a second, it's actually very hard to see which letter is which when they all have unnecessary little tails on them. Now Arial is a little bit more normal, and we're getting to the point where 12, 14, 16 font is a little bit more normal. Normalizing these things isn't about creating a new status quo, it's about making things more accessible for everyone who has to experience them. As someone who works on, or used to work on telephones, who works with volunteers who works on telephones, I'm highly aware of the difference between the training that we offer, which is predominantly written, versus the support that we offer, which is predominantly on the phone, and how that's going to impact volunteers coming in. There are lots of different ways to be volunteers, but the barriers are very similar for a lot of them. They can involve reading and writing, they can involve sending out an email, they can involve pages and pages of documents to fill out, of evidence that you need to provide, of training modules that you need to complete. And that's if you get through the interview. Those of us who don't really like eye contact, who struggle in social settings, interviews are a nightmare. And yet they're normal. They're a normal thing to expect people to be capable of doing. What we want to do, what I want to do, and I assume everyone here wants to do, is recognize the barriers that exist that make things unnecessarily difficult for everyone. The normality that we hold in our heads about what's an acceptable way of being, of what signposts someone as good enough or worthy enough or smart enough to be a volunteer, and recognize that a lot of them aren't necessary. If I walked in off the street having not prepared anything, hopefully, none of you would realize. You're assuming that since I'm here, I have a certain capacity to be here. You're assuming I probably jumped through a whole lot of hoops, but you don't actually know what those hoops are, because the task I'm completing right now is talking to all of you about something that I know deeply about and very passionate about. If I had an interview, who knows if I'd be here right now. If I didn't have my glasses and I had to stand under these fluorescent lights, who knows if I'd be able to sit here right now. Luckily, as both of you have spoken about, everyone's very unique. It's impossible for us to know how everyone is going to think or feel or need. But this part, luckily, we can use one thing we're all capable of, which is asking them. We can make spaces that are welcoming for people to stand up and go, can you please make the font larger? Is there an audiobook version of this? I don't really like eye contact, but I'm still paying attention, and let people feel safe in having these conversations. And we can ask them what else we can do to help. And hopefully that's what all of you can do a little bit of right now. Ask us a little bit about what we do and how we do it and why we're excellent at it in ways that you might not realize. So let's have some questions, I think.
Thank you, Felix. So we are now going to open up to questions, but a few things to note. Firstly, this session is being recorded. If you are happy to, please mention your name and the organisation you are from. Please keep your questions brief. As you ask a question, I'm going to repeat it, and that is not because I'd like to be a parrot. That's so that people listening online and watching online are actually able to hear the question. And finally, please note that our panellists are sharing from their own lived experience and offer a perspective that is specifically from that point of view. And as this subject matter is specific and personal, panellists may decline to answer a question, and I just thank you for your understanding in advance of that, and ask that you ask questions in a really respectful manner. So while you think of your questions, I'm going to ask a couple to start with. So Fiona, what are some steps an organisation can take to cater for and attract volunteers who are blind or vision impaired?
Okay. Thank you, Becc. Well, I think that you can do all the things that Felix said, really. I think, as Felix said, the most important thing is to ask people, because, as I said, everyone's vision is often very different, and people's requirements to be assisted are often very different as well. Some people will welcome some assistance because that means it makes their own life simpler. For example, today I've brought a support worker with me because I find navigating huge crowds and lots of places I've never been before quite difficult. But some people would see that as they would like to pride themselves on their ability to do something like that independently. So people are really different, and I think asking is the first and main thing. And as I said, just really thinking about the resources you're offering, finding out about web content accessibility guidelines. If you're designing any sort of technology or any sort of resources and actually applying them, there are accessibility checkers even with, Word and things like that. They're not always perfect, but they're certainly better than not using any sort of accessibility checker. And really thinking when you're acquiring your technology, making sure that it is going to be usable for a whole range of people. I think they're the things, because it's so hard once you've designed a system to redesign it to be accessible. If you make accessibility part of it in the first place, it's much easier.
Great, thank you so much. Felix, how does neurodiversity benefit a volunteer organisation?
Well, it depends on the neurodiverse person, but a lot of neurodiversity does involve having to navigate situations or experiences that are a little bit hostile to you. I think that's something we can all relate to. So right off the bat, it's an advantage because you'll have people in your organisation who can offer supports or have ideas about accessibility that have come from their lived experience, and they're more likely to spot them because they're more used to having to look out for them. I think another one, depending on who they are, people's skills vary greatly, but a lot of common experiences are things like hyper-focusing, someone getting so in-depth into a task that it's all they do for 6 hours. And definitely check on that person, but it's extraordinary what someone who is deep into something can complete. And certainly some people will find tasks that others would find incredibly boring to be fascinating and be able to do things. It's talking about data entry here. Some people love it, and that's incredible. And other people would be much more comfortable greeting or being at the front of the door, but they're able to dedicate their attention to something in a way that can be more difficult if you're neurotypical, more used to having to divert your attention in multiple spaces.
Fantastic, thank you. Beth, how and why do we safely harness the power of lived experience?
Because we don't all share the same lived experience. So for me, with living with an experience of bipolar disorder and post-traumatic stress disorder, as someone who doesn't have either of those mental illnesses, you can't begin to imagine what that's like, or how to include voices such as mine or make things inclusive for me. I grew up with a mother who lives with an experience of bipolar disorder, and I thought, yeah, I get it. I've lived with this, with someone experiencing this. I've seen it, I've experienced it with them. And it wasn't until I was diagnosed myself that I was like, you have no idea. You had no idea. It's not something that you can begin to explain to someone unless you've experienced it yourself. So that's why it's so important that we learn to share our lived experiences in a safe way, because it is also not helpful for me to just trauma dump on you and traumatise you, because then you'll take that away instead of the meaning and the value of what my lived experience is. So it's really incredibly important that we learn to share our lived experiences safely.
Awesome, thank you. So, who's got some questions? Yeah, Ricky.
Ricky Spencer. I'm a proud trans sociologist, and I'm part of, I'm the co-chair of Rainbow Voices, People Living with Disabilities in Victoria, and an advisory person at Volunteering Victoria. My question to each of the panelists is, you talked about the importance of diversity and inclusion in organisations for people to volunteer. I would love to hear from each of the panelists. What's one key takeaway that each person here can do today to ensure that their organisation includes diversity inclusion from your perspective that you feel is most important? Thank you.
So a key perspective around inclusion that people can take away today and instill in their organisation. Who would like to go first?
Well, I can go and then I'll hand over to Fiona. Ask a second question and then ask a third question. So every person can tell you something, and the best thing you can do is get more information, because that's often where that wealth is, where they'll share something about how they can be supported.
It's so hard. Have a phone number somewhere prominent on your information, because so many people who are blind or vision impaired can't even use, you know, the internet or a mobile phone, or you know, people who are losing their vision later in life, they haven't got time to learn all those skills. But if you can always have a phone number, then at least people can call up and actually talk to someone and find out all the information that might be on your everywhere else that they just can't read. So I think if you have a phone number, at least that says, we're happy to talk to you, and connection is what it's all about.
Thank you for such an important question. I guess I would follow on from Felix and say that it's important to create a safe space for people to answer those questions that you ask openly and safely. The thing with stigma is that you can ask the question, but if I don't feel safe enough to share my answer with you, I'm not going to. So for me, go away and create a safe space that people feel that they can open up and turn up as their authentic selves.
That's great. Beth, can you tell us a little bit more about what's the best way to go about creating a safe space?
So firstly, showing up as yourself as an authentic person. If you show up as you with all your warts and all, that immediately creates a safe space for other people because they go, oh, they're willing to show their weakness, they're willing to show their vulnerabilities. Showing up and being vulnerable allows space for other people to do the same. So that would be my simple answer.
That's awesome. And I love that those answers are things that we can all actually do today, right? We can make sure our phone numbers are easy to see, and we can, I love the ask a second and third question, because I think a lot of us get around to asking the first question, but that second and third question, that's really important. And yes, creating a safe space, being vulnerable. Have we got some other questions in the room? Yes. Gentleman in the back. Well, Kristen's going to get her steps in.
Hi, I'm Adam Lopez. I'm with Volunteerability, a project in South Australia helping connect people with disability, people with barriers to volunteering. And very soon we will be launching an online toolkit for volunteer organisations, for people who are interested in getting involved in volunteering, giving them, the information that they need as someone with barriers to volunteering. What would you want to see in that toolkit?
Great. So in a toolkit that is going to help people become more accessible, what would you like to see there?
Thank you for that easy question. Multiple options. A written version of something, an audio version of something, a phone number to go, I'd like to hear the options, or I'd like to talk directly with someone about them. A video that has captions is both so much more fantastic than a page of words, I think would be very valuable.
Great. Fiona and Beth, did you want to add anything?
Is the resources for the people with disability of volunteering, or is it for volunteers to assist the people with disability?
It's both.
Okay. Then I'd like to see, particularly for the people with disability who are wanting to volunteer, I'd like to see something that explains to them or clearly sets out the skills that they have through doing that. I think a lot of us volunteer but don't value it enough, or don't see our intrinsic worth in doing that. So I think that's something that says these are the skills you're building in doing all these things, and as I said, that can lead to employment or lead to feeling employable. And so I think something that really sets out the advantages for the volunteer person and their organisation, if that makes sense.
Fantastic. Another question? Just, I think this lady with grey hair. Did you want to go? Yeah.
This is a light relief question. I missed the organisations that Fiona and Beth were with, so if I could hear that again, that would be very helpful. Thank you.
I'm with Blind Citizens, it's hard to say, Blind Citizens Australia. And I'm also on the Vision 2020 Australia board, which is a vision health and eye care organisation.
And I'm with Mental Illness Education ACT, or MEACT.
I think there's a question at the front. Thanks, Kristen.
Good morning. My name's Melena. I'm with Cancer Council New South Wales. My question's not so much about where I work, but just about my lived experience. So looking at the context of COVID-19, so I have a lived experience of chronic depression and anxiety disorder, and it does track in my family as well. So I'm really resonating, Beth, with you about the, so that question. So what triggered that? That feeling. So during COVID-19, my experience within my organisation, and I was lucky enough to work in an organisation, was exceptionally supportive of everyone. There was very focused strategies around let's be vulnerable together, basically. So through COVID-19, pretty much every person I have contact with on a regular basis learned how to be vulnerable, and it's carried forward post-pandemic. So in my world, which as big as I like to think it is, it's quite small, the dial was shifted, on awareness around mental health and disorders and asking those questions. And I love that part there, Felix. With your experience, like you're seeing a lot more of the world than what I am, has the dial shifted or has it started to shift it? Is it shifting quick enough? What's your takeaway on that?
That's a good question. So the question is, has the dial shifted on, I guess, awareness of these different diversities?
Well, let me speak from my own personal experience first. So when I was diagnosed with PTSD and bipolar disorder, I was still a member of the Northern Territory Police Force. And of course, at that time, I felt I could not disclose that to anyone because I would have been fired on the spot. They'd have taken my gun and said, you're out, you're dangerous, you're crazy. So my self-stigma was huge. My fear of talking about these things was huge. I thought I was never going to amount to anything. And then I came to Canberra and I found MEACT. MEACT was my way to get myself into the community, and I was sold on it from day one. Using something that I'm supposed to feel so much shame and stigma about to empower other people to better manage their experience of whatever mental health, because of course no one is immune to stress and trauma. We are all going to experience that. So my experience of bipolar is one thing, but we're all going to experience tough times and we need to have the strategies to manage it. So for me, I watch people at MEACT do the incredible every day. Phenomenal to stand up in front of a room such as this and share their personal lived experience story of managing a mental illness. There is nothing more powerful than that. And it is, the tone, the dial is slowly moving in the right direction. As now we've seen that depression and anxiety have become far more common and there's so much less stigma around talking about those things, particularly after COVID. As you said, it's such a common experience now, people can relate to that. We're still finding that with serious mental illnesses such as schizophrenia and bipolar disorder, there is still a lot of stigma around that, but that is why we do what we do, so that I stand up in the front of the room and I put a face to bipolar and an experience behind that and what it looks like and feels like, so that the average person who has no idea other than what the media horrifically portrays, you have an idea of what that means and that I am still just as capable, happy, and living a meaningful and fulfilling life. So the dial is definitely moving in the right direction, never quick enough. But as long as we're having these conversations and these conversations are getting bigger, we're definitely moving in the right direction. Definitely much hope.
I have two examples for my answer to that. The first is that the wait list for mental health professionals has sadly skyrocketed. 3 to 6 months is a normal amount to have to wait to see a therapist. So we know that in terms of community, more and more people are recognising that they need support. Not always with a mental illness, but an awareness that not feeling good, that struggling can get worse if you don't get support. So I think definitely the dial is turning in terms of self-awareness and comfort in accessing services. The flip side to that is I'm a counsellor, not a psychologist, which means that myself and all of my colleagues are not covered by Medicare rebates. So someone cannot get a mental health care plan with us. For me, that's quite symptomatic that higher up, government levels, the dial is not shifting quickly enough, because now is the time to figure out how to get more mental health services, more people getting into help. And there's a really easy way to do that. This is me preaching a little bit. Get the people who have the training give them ways to see people for lower costs so that everyone who's struggling actually can access these people. I think that would make a huge difference. But we're seeing that the awareness of what we need is very, very clear down in the trenches, but up a little bit higher, it's where people can afford to see someone privately, it's much more slow. That's what I'm finding. Change the laws.
Great. Another question. I think our team from Communiteer in the green shirts has a question.
Thank you. My name is Alexander de Barros Santos, and I'm from Communiteer. Also, Felix, the mid-30s diagnosis of ADHD. I feel you right in my soul. Given the sheer number of permutations of different lived experience, be they ethnic, be they historical, be they mental health, etc., do you have any advice on harnessing these experiences on scale to create more welcoming and engaging volunteering experiences?
Another just small question for the team here. Do you have ideas around harnessing the diverse experience that is out there to make people more welcomed?
So it's definitely MEACT's Do No Harm framework, which we will actually have an exhibit table to discuss with you more if you're interested. The important thing is doing it in a safe way. It's one thing to go, let's all share our lived experience of whatever, but it's another to do it in a safe way so that we're not traumatising that person by reliving it or traumatising the people that hear it. I could easily sit here and tell you about all the things that led to me being diagnosed with PTSD and bipolar disorder, but that's what the takeaway message is going to be. It's all that trauma and, oh my God, I'm never going to be a police officer or go to the NT. Whoa. Instead of, oh, there's hope. I've learnt more about this experience. I have a better understanding, awareness. I feel like I could now do more to empower someone with that lived experience. So definitely finding a safe way to do it, which is, of course, we've found the best way to do it is through our Do No Harm framework.
I think for me, question your assumptions, a bit like what I think Felix said about making everyone go through interviews, or just whatever your process is, think about the ways that might be excluding people. You know, we do have, again, like Beth said, very high expectations often of how much people can read, and things like today, and I don't mean this as a criticism of the conference organisers at all, but it does say in the information, this is an easy 10-minute walk to lunch. Now that's an assumption that probably a 25-year-old woman made, that it's an easy 25, like maybe it's an easy walk, maybe it isn't. It's just it's a walk. That's all you should, you know. So many surveys will say, please answer this survey, it'll take you 3 minutes. No, I can guarantee you that if I have to use voiceover to do that, it's not going to take me 3 minutes. So I think about the assumptions you're making in those kind of statements. That's one thing. And the other thing is, although we've talked about asking a lot of questions, there's a lot of questions you don't need to ask. So you don't need to ask me, you know, how did I lose my vision, or how long's it been, or how do I do this? All those intrusive questions. Think about the sort of questions that you would want to answer about your medical history, and maybe, I guess, creating a culture where it's not okay for other people to ask those questions either, because I think that often, you know, people want to know, and I get it, I'm nosy too, but people will share that information if they want to, but it's not essential. So take people where they are now, and don't be saying, oh, but you know, you've got this vision thing and it's deteriorating. So does that mean that you'll go blind eventually? That person might not need to think about that right now. So yeah, I think leave people where they are, ask them what they need for now, and don't go everywhere else.
That's a really good point, I think. I'm a big question asker, but you're absolutely right. Just like don't comment on anyone's appearance unless it's something that they can fix in 5 seconds. Don't ask someone about something that you don't intend to support them with. I can see a hand raising, so I feel like it might be relevant to this conversation.
At the front here.
My name's Annette Holden and I'm a representative of Volunteerability as well, and also Volunteering South Australia and Northern Territory. And I just want to reinforce what Fiona and Felix just said. There is nothing more upsetting, and it happens all the time, where strangers demand to know really personal information that is none of their business, and take offence when I ask them that, you know, to mind their own business, but not using that language, but, you know, a bit more respectful than that. But yeah, it's so intrusive. But I'd also like to remind everyone here that it's actually illegal to pass on anyone's medical information. So if you're volunteer managers or even a volunteer yourself in a team, if someone trusts you with their personal medical information, any medical information, it is illegal for you to share that with anyone. The person's enabled, you know, if I can tell the world about my situation if I choose to, but if I tell it to you, you're not entitled to pass that on. So I just thought that was something important to raise. Yeah. Thank you.
Great reminder. Happy with that? Yeah.
In terms of scale, I think that one of the #1 things that you can do is either hire someone who has a lived experience that's common for the people who volunteer for you, or hire someone whose job is to ask those questions, to go out and speak and interview people. And that's one person, but it means that they're able to pass on information. And I guess the bigger part is take that person seriously. Take those reports and those responses as an important thing to start filtering down.
Yeah, and I just want to add to that, get those people on your governance as well, because there's just not enough people with lived experience on any board of any type in this country.
Okay. Another question down the front here, please, Kristen.
Thank you. I'm Catherine Sykes. I'm with the Australian Volunteers International Program. And I've noticed this morning that a number of people have identified with their labels a blind person, neurodiverse. How important are those labels? And do they have the potential to actually go against what you're trying to do, which is to look at the person and their experience and their environmental circumstances to affect their experience? The label actually gives people a shorthand that they perhaps inappropriately add information to.
So good question. The question here is around using labels. So everyone on our panel has identified their own lived experience today. And the question is, how does that play out using those labels? Does it eventually add to stigma? Why do we use them?
So good question, but I think you'll find, so when I explain my experience, I say I live with an experience of bipolar disorder. I don't say I am bipolar, because I am not my label. Bipolar is an experience that I live with, and that is a part of our Do No Harm framework. We do not want to label anyone because, no, it's a part of human nature. That's how we live. We label things, you know, friend or foe is what it comes down to. But I am not bipolar. I live with an experience of bipolar, just as the panel lives with an experience or something. So labels are just human nature, and they can be very problematic, and people can find themselves trapped below a label, you know, oh, I am bipolar, so this means blah, blah, blah. I am this, so it means this. It's really important that for us at MEACT and with the Do No Harm framework is that we talk about things as an experience and not as a label. You are not one thing. We are a myriad of things.
Thanks, Fiona.
This is one of those things that, you know, the labelled people struggle with all the time. So I would say for many years I would have said I'm blind. I'm not, you know, person. I would say I'm a person who's blind, but it's a very personal thing. And obviously there's a very strong movement of disability pride, but for someone who's lived their whole life in a certain way and then finds they're losing their vision, they might find the concept of disability pride something that they really can't come to grips with. I think again, it is labels Labels can be really unhelpful if you're imposing them on someone, but if someone chooses that label, it's not for you to say, look, I feel really uncomfortable with you calling yourself disabled. I think you're different and you've got special abilities. So I'm going to call you specially abled. Well, I think it's really what the person wants to be identifying as. Yeah, that's probably, but in the end also, there's nothing I can do. People see me as a blind person. I can do whatever I like. When I say to someone, oh, meet me somewhere, I'll give them all sorts of descriptors and I never say I'm the blind person. It's like a game you play. But in the end, that's how people see you. So for most of us, I think, well, that's the identity that the world gives us. So we kind of might as well make sure the world gives that as positive a feel as possible. That's sort of how I feel about it.
Well said. Did you want to add anything to that, Felix?
I probably have a bit of a hardline stance on this one. What I will say is that the autistic community has had a lot of conversation about this, and that's a really valuable thing to look up, the discussions around being a person with autism versus being an autistic person, because there's a lot in either direction. There's a strong sense that autism has some very strong stigma associated with it, and as a spectrum of experiences, people can feel very differently within it and experience very different symptoms. On the other hand, there's a sense of community that can come with a label that is very powerful. A lot of people who've been diagnosed with a neurodiverse condition will then go online and find communities and find the pros to their condition for the first time, only when speaking to other people with the same label. So what I'll say is use the language that the person is using always. If someone doesn't identify as an ADHD person, then don't call them that. And keep an eye on yourself, because what it does come down to, I'm saying this as nicely as I can, is what you associate with the label you use. In a counselling context, it's easy to, in past jobs, describe someone as, the BPD person. And it's a negative. It is these people will speak to you in a certain way. You can expect certain things from them. You can expect negative things from them. So if those conversations were about these people are doing wonderful things, here's how we can support them, here are some useful strategies that have been given to us by them, that's going to have a little bit less stigma ongoing. It's going to have less negative impact. So it's really about policing your own thoughts about what you tie to certain labels, just as much as people will tie to their own labels, I think.
Great answers. Other question? Kristen, just on this side.
Thank you. Hi, Joni from VolunteeringACT. One of the common questions we get from volunteer managers or leaders of volunteers relates to, I guess, one of the initial potential barriers to volunteering is the volunteer application form. We get a lot of queries around, well, what can I put on the application form about asking people about their disability? What would be your thoughts around what someone like on a volunteer application form, what should or shouldn't be on there related to disability?
Great question. Who would like to take the lead on this? Don't all jump in at once, please. Go, Fiona.
Well, firstly, you can't straight out ask, do you have a disability? Because obviously it's a discriminatory question. But you can ask, are there adjustments you require to work with us, or what are your access needs? Try and find a positive way of expressing that, and invite a conversation about that.
Excellent. Did you want to add something, Felix?
As you were speaking, Fiona, I had one or two thoughts, and the first one was tick boxes, because there's something a little bit less threatening about here's a list of things, we've already thought of them, so in theory we already have them, that people might need, and you can just tick which ones might suit you, and if you have any additional ones, also include them. And I think personally that would be easier than having to write things out and feel like I was admitting a weakness, as opposed to seeing that someone else had already thought of these things and considered them for me.
That's great. So Felix, just to clarify, what you're suggesting is to list the reasonable adjustments we could make, not list any sort of disability. Yes. Yeah, great. Another question? Yeah. Very convenient. Kristen didn't need to move at all.
Good morning, everyone. My name's Benita. I'm kind of coming with two hats. I'm from Baptist Care South Australia, but I'm also a lived experience advocate in a program called Voices for Change. Over there, it's domestic and family violence. So my question is probably two-pronged. Can I also just start by saying you are amazing, everybody down there on the panel, and I've loved listening to all of you, so thank you. Just want to tell you you're cool. But my question is, because I'm noticing in my two different roles, there's a high demand on lived experience. You know, seeing you guys here today and having this as a subject at the National Volunteering Conference highlights how important that voice is, and it really is. So what I guess I'm looking for is maybe, and it may be in your framework, Beth, I'm not sure, do you have any kind of research or recommendations or resources that we could look at to manage the demand of lived experience from an organisation? So, you know, we want to bring lived experience volunteers in my professional role, and that's fantastic. We want to do it safely and well. In the lived experience hat that I wear, there's an incredible amount of pressure from media, I'm just going to say it, politicians, and making those lived experience voices, I guess, the face of a particular campaign or initiative or project, which can be so amazing, but also can be high pressure and I think very dangerous for people. So really, I'm wondering, do you have some resources or, like, you know, the golden answer to how do you manage that demand safely? Because you want to get the message out there, you want the voices heard, but I'm finding that organisations and governments' expectations are sometimes not aligning with what would be safe for a lived experience volunteer. I know that's a very big question, but maybe the direction or a tip would be great. Thank you.
So that's around managing the pressures and the demand for lived experience. What are the thoughts that we have on the panel, Beth?
We were actually talking about this before the session. There is a huge push at the moment across government, across every facet of life, to let's get the lived experience voice heard, which is so critical. It's phenomenal that that is happening, but the concern, of course, is the danger that that poses, doing it without any frameworks in place, just to openly say, you know, come and tell me all about the things you've been through. That has so many things that could go wrong, both for the individual that is sharing their lived experience, but also the people that are hearing it. You know, some poor person over in the APS sitting there, oh, I'm here to get your story down, and they're sitting there 20 odd stories of trauma. That person is going to suffer from vicarious trauma and be off work and traumatised and be going through their own experience of mental ill health as a result. So it is so important that we find a safe way to harness, again, the power of lived experience. And I, of course, come back to our do no harm framework, but that isn't much of an answer when we're trying to do it on such a large scale at such a rapid pace. We have we've just gotten approval to go national, so we are looking at supporting government bodies nationally to harness lived experience in a safe way, because it is so important that for the listener and the person telling the story that there's things put in place, the what to say, how to say it in a safe way, that gets the message across without the trauma behind it. So I would urge your organisation or any organisation interested in safely harnessing the power of lived experience to look into our Do No Harm framework. It has been evaluated in 2019 as best practice for sharing lived experience, particularly around mental health.
Did you want to add anything, Felix or Fiona? Don't we all just want the answer?
I'm going to say that regardless of what the experience is, there's probably someone on the internet who's already preaching about it on YouTube or TikTok. And that's a good place to start. There are some very visible proponents for almost everything. And many of them, it's either a lived experience background or a mental health background or both. And getting in contact with them as a starting point, you'll be speaking to someone who already has experience and a very public face. And it might be a safer way to start that conversation with someone who already has followers as well, a little bit of free marketing there, without the worries and the uncertainty that comes with taking someone who hasn't been in the spotlight before and thrusting them into it without knowing if that's something that they want. That's where I'd start on TikTok.
Other questions at the back of the room, just behind you, Kristen. Yep.
Hi, my name is Pete Townsend. I'm from Hepatitis WA, but I also do some lived experience work with WAM, which is the WA Association of Mental Health. I've recently done an in-depth training on lived experience, and although I'd never heard of the framework that you talk about, it's completely in line with what they do. So I just wanted to suggest to the previous question asker from, I think, South Australia you were from, if you go through to your peak body in SA, they should have a whole bunch of training, I think, which mirrors the training that WAM do. They're certainly very helpful in my role at Hepatitis WA, which is a completely different kettle of fish, in getting lived experience volunteers through. Certainly a big help for me, so I just wanted to maybe mention that.
Thanks.
Yes.
Another question in the room?
Yeah, sorry, me again. As part of my job with volunteerability, I do disability training education for volunteer organisations. I have the triad of neurodivergency. I have autism, ADD, and dyslexia, which, according to some people, I guess would qualify me for human flight. But I've found in that work, in talking about it, in breaking down stigma, I've become very passionate about it. It's something that I never thought I'd be doing. But I'd really love to get more into advocacy, into communicating and breaking down these, the stigma around disability. And what advice, as disability advocates, would you give someone who wants to start that journey?
Okay, so advice about getting into advocacy for disability.
I'm happy to start since I relate. I think the first most important thing you can do is have similar friends. Start with a small community of people around you to support you to take this journey, because sometimes it can be hard, and being able to step back into a comfortable space with people who understand what you're trying to do is going to protect you emotionally as you move into the wider world of advocacy, whatever that could bring to you. Part two is you can just apply to be at a conference. No one can stop you.
I applied for this one.
And you can swap places later if you want to.
Notice, it's fine.
It's what I'm finding is it's a lot of having to be proactive, of stepping into things, of not waiting for an invitation to do things, and a lot of failing to get into things, which I certainly have a lot of experience of at this point. And that's why I say start with a community base. You have inside you already the information and the knowledge and the potential and the power to advocate and to share. What you need is the protection for when it gets hard, because that's the thing that we often forget to do for ourselves. Self-care, that's my answer to everything, I think.
I'd say find some mentors in the advocacy space. There's plenty of really great disability advocates out there. Find ones that you feel attuned to. I would say work out that you have your own experience, that there's people who are really good individual advocates, and there's also people who are representative ones. And if the representative ones recognise that they only speak from their own experience and try to gain access to the broader experience. So you try and get a broader group of people that you can, consult and talk to about things, so you're not just talking from your own experience all the time. Choose your battles. So it's really exhausting. I can't tell you, if I was going to complain about every website or app that I couldn't use every day, I just would be exhausted by the end of a week. So choose the things that you really care about and play the long game, because we've been trying to get audio description on on free-to-air television since about, I don't know, 1997. And we've now got 14 hours a week, not mandated, on the ABC and SBS. That's after 20 years. And the UN has just declared that it's a breach of our human rights not to have it on all free-to-air television. And so we're now fighting for that. But it's already been 20 years, so don't expect change too quickly.
Thank you. We're coming to the end of our time, so I just wanted to open it back up to the panel. Is there any final words you'd like to say? Anything you wanted to share that you haven't shared yet?
One thought I had as we were speaking was, so this is a panel about lived experience. At the beginning, Becc very carefully and kindly invited you to ask questions about our lived experience and acknowledge that there might be questions that we don't want to answer. So other than the obvious, we're all pretty happy to answer everything we can. None of you care about our lived experience, and I mean that positively. No one is going, so how do you get diagnosed? No one is asking those questions that Fiona, you brought up, can come up very commonly. So all I'd say is please take that energy forward. Assume that each person you speak with is as much an expert in their field as you very kindly treated us as, and ask them the questions that can help you move forward, not bring them back into themselves or into the past. That's my final thought.
Amazing. Thanks, Felix. Fiona? No?
Oh, it's my turn now to go. I think I'd leave you with the message of find the courage to be vulnerable, because it really is the bridge to connection, and that's why we're all here. That's what makes us human. Is the reason we're alive is to connect with each other.
Yes, get some people with disability in your leadership of all your organisations and give them jobs.
Great. Thank you so much. So thank you to all of our panellists and thank you for attending.